Well, joining me now here in studio to break all this down is David Mencer, the former director of Labour Friends of Israel and senior international connector at Honest Reporting. Nice to have you in studio, David.
No, just no longer Honest Reporting, but the rest was correct.
Firstly, he is not putting the cart before the horse here, because what exactly would happen to the Hamas terrorists that are in full control of Gaza right now and who also have a fortune of support in the West Bank?
Well, I think since he made those comments, the British government has been rolling back privately amongst Conservative MPs. They've told me this morning that there's been no change to British foreign policy. So in that sense, there is no change. And I think it'll be important to see what Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, says today at Prime Minister's Questions in an hour or so's time. So that'll be very, very important. But it's not unusual in the UK for the British Foreign Secretary to point one way and for the Prime Minister to point another way. And I think that's what we're seeing now. Let's just remember that the UK is very much engaged in the fight against Iran right now. So I think it's important to shore up support from across the international community. That's why David Cameron probably made these comments, and I think you should see them in that context.
Well, who exactly is the partner for peace here? Because it's all good and well to demand a two-state solution in the midst of a war, but Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the Palestinian Authority, for that matter, have all openly declared that their intention is to get rid of the Zionist entity, aka the Jewish state. So in the chant of From the River to the Sea, there's no little fine print there that says, by the way, what we really mean by this chant is two states for two people.
Look, I think you're absolutely right, Bachia. I'm not going to argue with you in any way whatsoever, because it is absolutely ridiculous, and we cannot, at this point in time, at 2024, 117 days into the most horrific crime against the Jewish people, which there has been since the Holocaust, the reward for that cannot be a Palestinian state. And of course, overarching all of this is again and again and again, it's the Palestinians, the Palestinian leadership themselves, that constantly decline a Palestinian state. So I think this is just mood music. You could say that the Foreign Secretary is thinking about a legacy for himself, but whatever the reason, he's done what he's done. He said what he said. I think British policy is made by the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister will make his points clear today at Foreign Office Questions, which I think is only in an hour or so's time. So we won't have long to wait. And I think he would say that the British policy is unchanged, and I think that's what David Cameron has been making clear to Conservative MPs who are supporters of this beleaguered country which we're sitting in right now. I think he's making that point very, very clear, that the British government foreign policy has not changed.
Well, there does seem to be, as you pointed out, somewhat conflicting narratives. Cameron sounds like he wants to have his cake and eat it too, because earlier this month he told British lawmakers he was concerned that Israel was violating international law in the Gaza Strip. But then the British Foreign Office also put out a statement rejecting South Africa's claim that Israel is in fact purposefully committing genocide in the Gaza Strip. And so, as you mentioned, we won't have long to wait, but which one is it? Where does Britain stand at the moment on this war?
So again, Bachia, it's not uncommon for the British Foreign Secretary to point one way towards the Arab world and for the Prime Minister to point the other way towards Israel and an understanding of Israel's unique position in the Middle East. And that's been a long, I wouldn't say it's a great tradition from the UK, but it's a real tradition. They do try to point both ways. Look, after October the 7th, the Prime Minister in the UK made his agenda very, very clear. He said to the Prime Minister Netanyahu, he said, we want you to win. We want you to defeat Hamas. And I think that is still the line, because Britain remains the strongest supporter of Israel within Europe right now. You can't see within the European Union, obviously, because Britain is no longer part of the European Union, but Britain still remains. And I think that is the case, notwithstanding the difficult images which are on the British TV channels every single night of a humanitarian catastrophe, which the British media would have you believe is happening in Gaza. Notwithstanding that, Britain remains, I think, the strongest supporter of Israel in Europe, and that will remain the case.
Well, let's touch on that humanitarian catastrophe for a moment, just because we've seen the damning reports that are coming out now about UNRWA. We've got a UN organization that's sole purpose was set up in order to assist the refugees displaced by war, displaced by conflicts in the Gaza Strip, of which have remained refugees for years, which is also unprecedented in the organization's history, and what it was set up to do essentially failed at its one purpose. But what do you make of the fact that major countries around the world are now withdrawing their funding?
Well, it's a welcome development, but of course we should never have been here in the first place. This whole UN debacle, I think the Israeli government has made very, very clear that Hamas has been acting for a cover that the UN has been acting as a cover for Hamas within Gaza, and that's been absolutely clear for all impartial and well-minded, good-minded people to see right now. The key point is for Israel right now, it must step up its Hasbara work. It must step up its public relations work to the outside world. I think the 7th of October, there's been many, many failures, but one of the biggest failures it's exposed is the fact that we're not speaking enough. We're not putting out our message to the outside world. We're using the same old spokesman, giving the same old messages, and in the same way ineffective. We need to move forward on this agenda in the same way that there have been mistakes on the security front when it comes to the 7th of October. There have been mistakes on Israel's PR effort, and I think Israel must work harder now. We've got experts like Elon Levy that have done a fantastic job in putting Israel's message out to the outside world, but we need much more of it, and we can't use the same old people that have been ineffective in the past. This is a new world. The younger people are not with us anymore, so we need to push harder to win those young people back and educate them about this country.
Well, how much of that effort would be in vain? We've seen the insane rise of anti-Semitism throughout the globe, not just in Europe and the United States. How much of that, even with Israel boosting its PR, its Hasbara, as you pointed out, would actually bring in the results that it so desires? Is it not simply a mission that's kind of dead on arrival, given the rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Zionist rhetoric?
We can never, ever leave the field. But we can never, ever leave the field to the Israel haters, to the Jew haters, to the people that want this country to be destroyed. We can never, ever leave it for them to do whatever they want, say whatever they want. We must continue this fight. Yes, it's difficult. I understand completely why Israelis sometimes feel beleaguered in this country when it comes to the international media. There very rarely seems to be any understanding of Israel and the trials and tribulations which we're facing right now. But we cannot leave it for the other side to win. We must fight. We must push our message out there, and most importantly, we must bring more people into this country, because the most powerful thing you can do when it comes to educating people about the vulnerabilities of Israel is to bring them over here. We've stopped doing that to a large extent. We've stopped spending money on these sorts of things. We need to bring many more young people, more student leaders, more members of parliament, more journalists, more opinion formers, more social media formers. We must bring them much more of them into this country, because that's what works. What's important is what works, not the same old things that we've tried in the past which haven't been effective.
Because seeing is believing, correct?
Indeed. When you visit this country, it happens within the first hour or two. You just get the size of this country, how small it is, the youth of the soldiers, the vulnerability of this country, the fact that we are still sadly surrounded by a non-democratic nation. So we must bring more people over here.
David Mencer, former director of Labour Friends of Israel, thank you very much for joining me here in studio.